It started on a Tuesday. Not a particularly special Tuesday, no birthdays, no anniversaries, not even a dinner reservation. Just one of those still spring days in early May when everything feels suspended in the soft bloom of things yet to come. I'd been folding laundry in the upstairs guest room, the one we always said we'd turn into an office, but never did. There was a quiet in the house that used to feel comforting. Now, after almost 30 years of marriage, it just felt heavy, like the silence knew too much. And then the phone rang. It was my husband, Michael, calling from the airport, telling me that his brother Raymond, well, technically his stepbrother, would be stopping by. His flight had been delayed on his way back to Chicago from Phoenix, and he had a 6-hour layover. "He'll take an Uber," Michael said. "Just offer him a beer or something, would you?" I hadn't seen Raymond in almost 12 years. We never really spent much time with him. He'd always felt more like a satellite than family, orbiting the edges of reunions and holidays, polite but distant. I remembered him being charming in a restless sort of way, quieter than Michael, but with this odd, self-contained warmth that made you wonder what he was thinking. And I remembered, maybe a little too vividly, the way he looked when we were younger, tall, tanned from wherever he'd been living at the time, always with a camera slung over his shoulder and a story just vague enough to make you want to lean in. By the time he rang the bell, I'd already changed out of my yoga pants and into something with sleeves. Not because I wanted to impress him, I told myself. It just didn't feel right answering the door in sweats. He was older, obviously. We all were. His hair was streaked with silver now, not the sun-drenched blonde I remembered, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. But God, they suited him. If anything, age had sculpted him into something more interesting, more magnetic. He smelled faintly of cedarwood and jet fuel, and when he hugged me hello, it felt less like family and more like memory. "Wow," he said, stepping inside, his eyes scanning the foyer. "You haven't changed a bit." It was the kind of thing people say, without thinking. But he didn't say it like that. We sat in the kitchen, catching up over beers, the easy conversation slipping into more personal currents than I'd expected. He asked about my work, I'd stopped teaching last year, and how I was adjusting to early retirement. He asked about the kids, about the neighborhood, about Michael's golf obsession, which had become so consuming he now spent every weekend on the course, even when it rained. "I don't get it," I admitted, swirling the foam in my glass. "It's like he retired from me." Raymond's eyes met mine. They were still that pale gray blue, like morning fog. "Do you miss him?" he asked softly. The question caught me off guard. I laughed, trying to make it sound light. "Miss him? He's still here. Just elsewhere." He nodded like he understood too well. Then silence again. Not awkward, but charged in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just that I'd been lonely. It was that I'd forgotten I could still be noticed. That someone might look at me like I was still a woman. A few hours later, after another drink and some cold leftovers I'd pulled from the fridge, he stood up to leave. I walked him to the door. He didn't hug me this time. He just lingered a moment, then said, "You always made this place feel like a home. You know that?" Something in his voice made my throat catch. And then he was gone. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because something had shifted. The way you shift your weight when you've stood too long in one place, realizing how numb you've gone. It wasn't long before we started texting. At first, it was innocent. Thank yous and follow-ups and updates on flights and photos of a meal he said reminded him of something I used to make. Then it grew. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" he texted one afternoon. The unexpected? He meant travel, of course. Raymond had spent most of his adult life flitting between continents, shooting documentaries, living out of backpacks and camera bags. But something about the phrasing struck me as personal. "I think I miss feeling interesting," I replied, before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Then, "You are. You always were." That was the first time I felt it, the pull. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, like a tide changing direction. And yet, somehow, I knew everything would be different now. Raymond came back through town 2 weeks later. This time, he stayed overnight. Michael was out of town for a golf retreat in Palm Springs. I told myself it was just one night and that I was doing Raymond a favor. He'd been working a job nearby and needed a place to crash. That's all. We had dinner.
He brought wine.
We sat out on the patio. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cut grass and early summer. I wore a cotton dress I hadn't put on in years. It felt too young for me now, but when I passed by the hallway mirror, I didn't hate the way it looked. "I always thought you were beautiful," he said quietly, without turning his head. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Later, when the night had stretched and softened into something slow and humming, he touched my wrist.
Lightly.
As though he was asking permission.
"Tell me to stop," he said.
But I didn't. We moved carefully at first, as though the years between us made us both a little hesitant. But then something broke open in me, something I didn't know was still there. It wasn't just the heat of it, the slow slide of his hands, the way he murmured my name like it belonged to him. It was the recognition that someone could still look at me and want not the memory of what I was, but the reality of what I am. His mouth found the inside of my thigh, and I heard myself gasp in a way that didn't sound like me. And when he finally moved above me, pressing in, I arched to meet him like we were made to fit that way. There was no awkwardness, no doubt. Just skin and breath and the deep, aching need to feel alive again. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, his hand tracing lazy circles on my hip. "This shouldn't have happened," I whispered. "But it did," he murmured, pulling me closer. "And it doesn't feel wrong." I didn't argue. When Michael returned, things resumed. At least on the surface. But nothing felt the same. I found myself checking my phone more often, craving the little messages that came at strange hours, photos of wherever Raymond had landed next, jokes about things we'd shared, memories I didn't realize we both held. It wasn't just sex. It was attention. A kind of intimacy I hadn't felt in years. Was it love? Not quite. But it was something dangerously close. And whatever it was enough to make me risk everything I thought I knew. And I wasn't ready to stop. The mornings after were always the hardest. Not because of guilt, at least not in the way people expect. It wasn't some melodramatic weight pressing down on my chest or an urge to confess in tears.
It was subtler than that.
A kind of hollow echo, like laughter in an empty room. I would wake up beside Michael, his back turned to me as always, and stare at the ceiling, my body still humming with memory. Raymond had a way of lingering without being present. A touch remembered on the small of my back. The scent of his cologne. Something woodsy, masculine, faintly foreign, still clinging to the sheets he'd slept in 2 nights before. Even the silence in the house seemed to shift when he left, like the walls were holding their breath. He messaged me the next afternoon. Just 3 words. "Still thinking about you." It was simple, direct.
No emojis. No paleris.
I stared at the screen longer than I should have before replying. "You shouldn't be." He didn't answer right away. And when he finally did, it was just, "I am, anyway." The thing about being married for almost 30 years is that everyone assumes you're past the point of temptation. They think passion belongs to the young, or, at the very least, the newly matched. No one talks about what it feels like when you're 56, your kids are grown and gone, and the man you once stayed up all night for now falls asleep with the remote still in his hand. Michael hadn't touched me, not really touched me, in over 9 months. We kissed out of habit, hugged like coworkers, slept like strangers. And I had made my peace with that, or thought I had, until Raymond reminded me I had a body worth reaching for. We saw each other again 2 weeks later. He was passing through on his way to a photography conference in Seattle and asked if we could meet, just for lunch, just to talk. I said yes before I'd even finished reading the message. We met at a small bistro 2 towns over. I wore a blouse that dipped just low enough at the neckline to hint, but not shout. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, sunglasses perched on his head, nursing an espresso. His face lit up when he saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, standing to greet me. He didn't kiss my cheek, but I felt the nearness of his breath when he leaned in. Neither was I admitted. We ordered light, salads and wine, though it was barely past noon, and talked like old friends, like co-conspirators. We laughed more than we should have. When he reached across the table and brushed a crumb from the corner of my mouth with his thumb, I felt it in places that had been asleep for years. "Come with me," he said softly, as we stood by the car afterward. "Just for a drive." I hesitated, looked at my watch, my phone, my wedding ring. "I have errands," I murmured. He leaned closer. "Run them later." I went. We drove along the back roads, the windows down, the air thick with honeysuckle and something like nostalgia. He told me stories about Patagonia, about a woman he'd loved once in Amsterdam, about the way the sky changed colors in Morocco at dusk. At one point, he pulled the car over by an old vineyard that had gone fallow, the rows of twisted vines like ghostly fingers clawing at the sky. There was no one around, just the two of us and the long, aching quiet. He turned toward me. "Why did you come?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because you make me feel like I exist." His hand found mine, fingers sliding between mine like they belonged there. "Come to the hotel," he whispered. I didn't answer. But I didn't stop him when he started driving again, either. The hotel was nothing fancy. A business suite near the airport.
Clean. Safe.
But inside, everything felt electric. We didn't speak much. He pressed me against the door as it clicked shut behind us, his mouth finding mine with an urgency that stripped away the rest of the world. Clothes became obstacles. Buttons fumbled, zippers hissed. When he pulled my blouse over my head, he paused just long enough to look. Really look. "You're more beautiful now than you've ever been," he said. I wanted to deflect, to make a joke. But the way he said it, slow, reverent, it landed somewhere I hadn't let anyone touch in years. He kissed my collarbone, my shoulder, the inside of my wrist. Every gesture deliberate, worshipful. When he knelt in front of me and pressed his mouth between my thighs, I had to grip the wall to stay upright. And when he lifted me to the bed, slow and sure, moving inside me with a rhythm that was both gentle and commanding, I let go in a way I didn't know I still could. My whole body opened, sobbing with pleasure I'd forgotten was mine to feel. Afterward, we lay there, breathless and damp, the room dimming around us. "I don't want to be the reason you break," he murmured against my shoulder. "You're not," I said. "You're the reason I woke up. Back home." The world kept spinning. Michael was polite, predictable. He didn't notice that I hummed under my breath while loading the dishwasher. Didn't ask why I smiled at nothing in the garden. If he suspected, he never said a word. But something in me had changed. I started wearing lipstick again. Bought new lingerie. Not for Raymond, but for me. I went back to yoga. Took long walks by myself. Earbuds in. Miles Davis in my ears. The wind in my hair. I felt untethered. And freer than I had in decades. Raymond and I didn't see each other every week. Sometimes there were gaps, 5, 10, even 15 days without a touch. But the messages never stopped. Sometimes sexy, sometimes sweet, sometimes just a photo of a place that made him think of me. And always, when we met again, it was like the first time, eager, familiar, desperate. One night, after a slow, candlelit dinner in my kitchen while Michael was away at a conference, Raymond pulled me into my own bedroom. The same bed I'd shared with my husband for over half my life. And somehow that made it more intimate, not less. "I want to know all of you," he said that night, his voice low as he moved inside me. "Not just the parts that ache." I cried afterward, not from guilt, but from the sheer overwhelming grief of having lived so long feeling invisible. I don't know when it stopped being an affair and started being something else. Something deeper, more dangerous. He started to say things that scared me. Things like, "I wish we'd met when we were younger." And, "Do you think you'd ever leave him?" I didn't answer.
Couldn't.
Because I didn't know. But I started asking myself questions I hadn't let surface in years. Not just, am I happy? But, am I still the kind of woman who could start over? It was late August when everything began to tilt. The kind of heat that clings to your skin even in the shade, thick and airless. Michael had been gone for almost a week. Golf again, of course. This time in Scottsdale. Some charity tournament that somehow also required expensive dinners and cigars. I didn't ask questions anymore. I didn't even pretend to be interested. Raymond was in town again. Officially, he said it was for a potential film pitch with some studio people, but we both knew better. He stayed with me for 3 nights. Not in secret, not exactly. I told the neighbors he was my husband's stepbrother, which was true. I said he needed a place to crash. Also true. What I didn't tell them was that the man upstairs in my bed had memorized every inch of my body and touched it like he was trying to bring me back to life. Those nights were different from the others.
Softer.
Slower. We cooked together. He played old jazz records on Michael's forgotten turntable in the den, and we danced barefoot in the kitchen, laughing over burnt risotto and wine-stained counters. "You laugh more when you're with me," he said once, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I don't remember when I stopped," I answered. And it was the truth. That Friday, we went for a walk just before sunset, down the path behind the house that led to the edge of the woods. It had been years since I'd bothered to walk that trail. Too many mosquitoes. Too many memories. But with Raymond, I felt bolder. Younger almost. We stopped at a clearing where the trees opened wide to a sky so pink it looked painted. He turned to me, took both of my hands in his. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice was calm, but something in his eyes made my stomach tighten. "What is it? Is this real for you?" he asked. "What we're doing? What we have? Or is this just something you need right now to feel alive?" I didn't answer right away. The truth felt like a delicate thread stretched too tight. One wrong pull, and everything might unravel. "I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't plan to feel anything." "But you do," he said, stepping closer. "Feel something." "Yes. And you know I'm in love with you." I closed my eyes. Because I did know. He'd never said the words before. Not directly. But I'd seen it. In the way he watched me when I wasn't speaking. In the way he kissed my palm when we parted. In the way his body curled protectively around mine in sleep, like I was something to be guarded. When I opened my eyes, I saw it written all over his face. Unapologetic. Steady. "Ray," I said softly, using the name only a few had ever called him. "I love being with you. But I don't know how to be with you. Not in this life. Not yet." He nodded, jaw tightening. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he whispered, "Then tell me what you need. Tell me how long you want me to stay." And I broke. Right there in the clearing, with cicadas singing and the last of the sun warming my back, I reached for him like I'd fall apart if I didn't. We sank down onto the earth, tangled in roots and leaves and stolen breath. He lifted my skirt, and I wrapped my legs around him, no words between us, only movement, slow, desperate, reverent. There was something raw in the way he held me, something close to grief. And I felt it too, that trembling, terrifying knowledge that what we had could not live in the light forever. But I didn't stop him. I didn't stop myself. We made love every night that weekend. In the guest room, on the stairs, in the shower with the water pounding down and my hands braced against the tile, his voice in my ear telling me I was beautiful, that I was his, that he didn't care where we were, as long as I was there. Each time felt urgent. A kind of slow-burning panic beneath the pleasure, like we were devouring something we couldn't keep. On the final night, he stayed up late, sitting in the kitchen with a whiskey while I lay upstairs pretending to sleep. I watched him from the top of the stairs. The way he sat barefoot at my kitchen table, eyes distant, lips parted like he was whispering to someone who wasn't there. He looked older somehow. Not tired, but waiting. And that terrified me, because I didn't know what I was ready to give. After he left the next morning, everything became too quiet. Michael came home that evening, tan and chatty, and full of nothing. He kissed me on the cheek, asked if the sprinklers had gone off while he was away, then spent the next hour talking about a new driver he wanted to buy. I sat across from him, nodding, sipping wine, feeling my insides float somewhere just out of reach. It was surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. A life I'd once known. A version of me I no longer believed in. That night, Michael reached for me in bed. It was rare.
Clumsy.
Not aggressive, but habitual. I froze. His hands on my body felt foreign, like a borrowed gesture. I let him touch me, let him press against me, go through the motions. I even faked it. And afterward, as he rolled away, satisfied and oblivious, I stared into the dark, shame and sadness swirling in me like smoke. Not because I'd betrayed him, but because I had never felt more alone. I didn't see Raymond for a month. He texted, called once or twice, sent a postcard from Madrid with no return address, just one sentence on the back. The light here would look beautiful on your skin. I didn't answer, because I didn't know what to say, because I missed him so badly it hurt to breathe. Then, one afternoon in late September, Michael's mother called. She wanted us all to come down for Thanksgiving. The whole family.
Apropé reunión.
And Raymond would be there. Michael mentioned it over dinner, between bites of baked chicken and steamed carrots. Ray's coming, he said. He's finally taking a break from all that globe-trotting nonsense. I must have gone pale, because he looked up. Are you okay? Fine, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired. But my heart was pounding, because I didn't know what would happen when I saw him again. Because I didn't know what I wanted to happen. Because the version of myself I'd become in secret was starting to feel more real than the one I lived with every day. Thanksgiving crept up like a wave I didn't know how to brace against. The trip down to Michael's mother's house was uneventful on the surface. 5 hours in the car, Michael narrating local radio reports and football stats while I stared out the window, watching golden fields and brittle trees blur into memory. I felt both nowhere and everywhere at once, as if I'd left something vital behind, but didn't know where. We arrived just before sunset. The driveway was full of cars, cousins, siblings, their grown children. Laughter spilled out from the porch. Someone was playing piano inside, badly, but enthusiastically. And then, just as I stepped out of the car, I saw him. He was leaning against the side of the garage, a bottle of beer in one hand, his shirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Casual, effortless. But when his eyes met mine, everything else blurred. It was like the first time again. That impossible instant when a whole life tips towards something new. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. And I felt it all over again. That impossible tug in my belly, that ache between my thighs, that terrifying flutter behind my ribs. I forced myself to look away. The first hours were a blur. Hugs and polite chatter. Everyone asking how the kids were doing, what Michael was planning for retirement when we'd take that trip to Europe we always talked about. I played the role I'd perfected over decades. The warm, dependable wife. The woman who made polite toasts, asked about gluten allergies, folded napkins in the shape of swans. But my skin buzzed with every movement behind me. Every time I felt his presence in the room. Raymond and I barely spoke. A glance here. A brush of his hand near mine when we passed the breadbasket. A murmured, "Excuse me," when we both reached for the same serving spoon, and our fingers grazed. It was agony. And ecstasy. That night, after the dishes were done and the guests had scattered to their respective bedrooms and couches, I stepped outside for air. The garden behind the house was quiet. Just the low hum of a wind chime, the scent of rosemary and pine, the crunch of gravel beneath my slippers. And then his voice. "You always disappear when the party ends." I didn't turn around. Just closed my eyes. Some of us only feel real in the quiet. He stepped closer. I could feel the heat of him behind me. "I've missed you." "You shouldn't say that."
Why?
"Because your husband's upstairs and you're afraid he might remember you exist?" I turned then.
Slowly.
And there he was. Standing inches away, looking at me like I was the last thing left in a world that made sense. "You have no idea what this has done to me," I whispered. "What you have done to me." He reached out, touched my cheek. "I know exactly what I've done. I woke you up." I didn't speak. I didn't move. Because I wanted him to kiss me so badly it hurt. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back. "Come to me tomorrow. Before dinner. The old shed." You know the one. And then he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. Michael snored beside me, oblivious. The house groaned with the weight of generations and secrets. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the tide of choice rise in my chest. What was I doing? What was I becoming? And did I care anymore? I found the shed the next afternoon. It hadn't changed in 30 years. Rusted tools, dusty shelves, a broken rake. But the second I stepped inside, I felt him. He pulled me into his arms, kissed me like he hadn't eaten in weeks. Like I was water in a desert.
There was no slow build this time.
He lifted me onto the workbench, shoved my skirt up around my hips. No time for undressing. Just heat and hunger and desperation. He was inside me in seconds, our mouths pressed to each other's to stifle the gasps. The tools clanged faintly behind us, the air thick with sweat and longing and 20 years of what-ifs. We moved together like animals, like poetry, like punishment. And when it was over, he buried his face in my neck, breathing hard. I don't want to be a secret anymore, he whispered. My throat tightened. I don't know how to undo this life. You don't have to undo it, he said. You just have to leave it. I stared at the cracked window above his shoulder, at the light filtering through dust and cobwebs. I don't know who I am without it. Yes, you do, he said. You're just scared to admit it. We parted that evening like strangers. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze. I cooked. I smiled. I sat beside Michael at dinner and passed him the gravy while pretending I wasn't dying inside. When we got home, the silence in our house was louder than ever. I kept expecting it to feel like a return, like I'd cross the river and come back safely. But it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a cage. And I was no longer someone willing to live quietly inside it. 2 weeks later, I told Michael. Not about Raymond, not in detail. I didn't speak his name. But I told him I had changed. That I couldn't keep pretending we were okay. That I wasn't angry, just empty. And that I needed to leave. He didn't shout. Didn't cry. He just stared at me, stunned. I thought we were fine, he said quietly. I know you did, I answered. And that was the saddest part of all. I didn't move in with Raymond. I didn't fly off to Spain or start over in a loft in the city. I rented a small cottage outside town. Just me, my books, and a kitchen with good light. I started writing again, just journals, short pieces, nothing serious. And I took long walks. Every morning. Every evening. And sometimes, when I rounded a corner and the sky opened wide, I would feel it. That flicker of joy, of grief, of being awake. Raymond still wrote. Sometimes a message. Sometimes a photo. Sometimes a single sentence that landed like thunder. The wind sounds like you. The moon looked lonely without you tonight. Still thinking about you. And sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. But I never blocked his number. Because some doors don't need to close. Some just need to stay ajar, whispering possibility on the other side.